quick word since I haven't uploaded in a while. I don't care about the predictions in the Geopol series being proven right. The real spark has been how beneficial it was for debating in general. That wasn't the original thought, so that is great. This one will be more philosophical and straightforward to offer real answers that are desperately needed. One overarching theme in all my content has been that ideology is subservient to political theory. I'm not here to feebly dismiss the opposition as utopians or whatever tired label. I'm interested in dismantling their worldview. From that point we can see where we stand. How do I define liberalism? The Spurs deploy it to describe anything in convoluted and incoherent ways, which only serves to mystify it and to distort reality. The intention here is to narrow it down to the most precise and productive instance, which is simply appeals to humanity. When someone invokes broader humanity as a collective, what they are doing is implicitly denying differences between people, thereby denying your distinct political interests. That's the crucial and clear-pilled what's in it for me aspect that's often overlooked. The answer isn't complicated, it's accepting tribalism in its various forms. This doesn't mean that group affiliations are the primary foundation by themselves, like a crab high mind or something. They are an extension of oneself as an aggregate. Everything else is romanticizing. A lot of people are conditioned to be afraid or feel guilty over this. It's not a disputed fact that everyone operates on self-interest at some level regardless. The faction one becomes aligned with is relational. Its relevance changes depending on the context. We know it as discourse. The foundation for this is that all political concepts are polemical. They work for one against another. In the discourse of humanity, the designated other turns out to be non-humanity, which of course is a null point. Humanity as a whole is not opposing someone else. It is politically undifferentiated. It's an attempt to suspend the nature of confrontation. As such, it varies from general universalism. Appeals to humanity is an inherent speech act. What does this verbal action accomplish? It suppresses particularity and tensions. If you're not able to define yourself, your enemies and your friends, what you get is a distorted view of identity that pushes political energy inward. You see this with the cognitive dissonance and range of mental illnesses that libertarians put forward. They conceive civics and administration as the real politics, how much should go to road upkeep this year, etc. You can agree to their most solipsistic fantasies and still make it out regardless. Take the premise of infinite resources, for example. You still have unequal distributions and innate power differences, all while the most critical resource cannot be plausible, infinite, and thereby a non-factor: land itself. Everything is accessible to conflict because everything is subject to domination. This has nothing to do with the state of nature, it's just a conceptual balance between the strong and the weak. This principle doesn't imply that all conflicts are probable, just that they are possible. Some have a lot of historical precedent, while others have none. There are no new ideas, only group competition. This emphasis is much more profound than any of the usual templates or narrative obsessions. picking views from different camps or going through the X2E pipeline means virtually nothing. Neither you or your opposition needs to care about each other's quirky nuances. They are decoration, they exist in name only, outside the strife itself. This is the substance behind the words. Identities are created out of difference, and the difference has no further depth. So how do we measure the relevance of each affiliation? It depends on how re-identifiable they are. We can compare it to the sun. We know that it will appear in the sky at a certain time of the day with no deviation. This gives it a high conceptual predictability. A political identity becomes highlighted when it is contended, which gives it a reflection to bounce against. Here are the conventional subject configurations or discourses. They consist of racial, ethnic, national, religious, ideological, class, and they are split up between real, concrete, particular, and absolute, abstract, universal. I call them conventional because all types of disputes can become political if the tension between the collectives hit a certain boiling point with potentially existential consequences. Religious denominations used to be among the most prone to this temperature due to irreconcilable beliefs on the transcendental truth and the afterlife. The same logic applies in a concrete manner to incompatible border claims among states. It's things you can't be super wholesome and agree to disagree about. The rest of the list has been submerged with the global integration. You see this with Maoism's racialized anti-capitalism. It goes without saying that if you're concerned about class politics, then you should unsubscribe or internalize what I'm about to say. Any kind of class-based policies today would only be of relative gain for the stock population. While war is the highest form of conflict, prison environments also include this intensity by having immediate and confined contact between adversarial groups. It becomes more crucial than ever to quickly know who is with us and who is against us. Only then does the contest to accumulate resources, space, and security start. This dual labeling is the primary source of political life. You fight an enemy because they are your enemy, not economic, material gain, or any other secondary modes. Those can by choice be supplanted by trade or negotiations. They are reconcilable as a norm. While norms of course have exceptions, relying on secondary modes turns it away from stating the unavoidable question of either or. It might seem minor at first glance, yet it's a very common and decisive trap used in debates that a lot of people sadly slip at when they want to appear pragmatic. That only lets the opposition redefine the terms in their own favor. Instead of follow-up questions about what context, set the context yourself, and there you have it. Going by an economic material model also neglects immaterial grounds for conflict. There's a desire to gain, likewise a desire to avoid. Immaterial instances can be standing, retributions, and the banishment of religions and ideologies. Cooperation or conflict hinges of course on the circumstances, but on a conceptual level it's much preferable to be war-oriented, the bellicist position. The liberal model assumes that they are past the necessity of preparing for war, not to mention falling apart when faced with maxed out hostility. War as the world's only hygiene refers to history itself as the history of force. Its immanent value lies in its purity. It's the decisive means in power and the decisive means in contention, retaining or reasserting sovereignty. Now we'll take a deeper look at the ultimate underlying substance, the political. It's essentially the insulation that shelters the collective, our extended self-preservation. This layer grounds the entirety within it and makes it consistent. Autopilot made a good point about the based on what boomer meme. Most people base their beliefs on nothing. So yeah, it might sound funny in a giga-chat way, but without strong foundations, you'll get groomed by freaks of a Discord. The types who yell about the friend-enemy distinction as they get criticized by the side or let the account handle bans is another example of such failure. It becomes an excuse for acting like a retard. here are some examples of conceivable groundings. The further abstract it travels, the more mental gymnastics it requires, and you don't have to take it seriously. The political is the strongest, most intense form of distinction. It does not hold any predetermined content, and is freed from all other normative, non-existential spheres of societal life. They include regular politics, economics, religion, ethics, morality, law, aesthetics, entertainment, etc. These spheres follow their own particular logics. In aesthetics, it's whether something is beautiful or ugly. In economics, it's whether it's profitable or unprofitable. Morality, whether it's good or evil. It just needs to be intense enough to reach the political, at which point the internal laws of a certain sphere are pushed aside for the concrete situation at hand. An example would be talks about the rule of law, especially in international politics. It's a juridical notion in name that has been fermented to a specific political essence. This is one of the most important bits about the insulatory effect. You can call it encryption, gatekeeping, or whatever. What it does is that it prevents unauthorized access to our loyalty and moral capital. Ideas such as honor, justice, reciprocity, mercy are reserved only for the community itself. This since it is linked to our own being. Morality and ethics are not applied universally, because that would mean to an opposing force. It can be understood as a plurality of locally defined universal domains. A state or unit has zero obligations to its adversary. No disavowals are ever well-founded. What a political unit does to preserve itself will always appear as irrational from another that wants it subdued. There is no rational criteria, because it's purely situational. Nothing is off limits. There are two common tropes that have absolutely no place here: respecting the enemy and accusing of hypocrisy. Both come from outdated chivalric ideas. The hippies took advantage of this in the 1960s and forward with the whole make the opponent live up to his own rules strategy, harassing the weaker links to make them appease towards you. With rebuttal against universal morality in favor of exclusivity, one of the weakest cards turned into one of the strongest. Still, the final arbiter of politics won't be morality, which is mere opinion. A lot of political thought followed in Thomas Hobbes' footsteps, with the protection-obedience principle, outlining a stable state at the backdrop of the English Civil War. The compliance wasn't in regards to standards of behavior in the public law, rather making religion a private matter. Hobbes, however, never tried to extend the notion of sovereignty outside the state borders, and Rousseau, following him, suggested that the state should outright avoid international politics. It's Carl Schmitt in the Weimar Republic who makes an actual breakthrough by finding the lost twin of Hobbes' principle. Schmitt expounds that if there is an existential need to affiliate with the state or other allegiance, then there must be distinguishable friends and enemies as a latent rule. The Hobbesian state may be pacified, but not its anarchic outside. The friend-enemy code is therefore both the unity and struggle of opposites. This condition isn't anything new in practice, however it helped delineate a bone structure that had survived all historical manifestations of political forms, from Greek city-states to absolutist states to party constellations and paramilitaries. Who was Carl Schmitt, and more importantly, what was he responding to? He started out as apolitical, spending the war years as an intelligence officer in Munich. While critical of the war effort, he was later launched into politics in 1919, after communists breached the military office he worked at and shot a fellow officer next to him. He began writing his first polemic, countering the unsuitable romantic tradition that had permeated the German right, with its erosion of seriousness. This laid the groundwork for his most famous work, the concept of the political. Carl Schmitt exemplifies a Frankfurt School type of critique from the right side. Just like Lenin's position before him, His more moderate allies would have to be pulled away from preoccupation with ethics and economics that possessed contemporary ideologies, Marxism, early socialism, and classical liberalism. These very ascetic ideologies were inherently doomed by their compulsive risk avoidance and moral condemnations. As parliamentary discussion and relative rationalism lost its convincing force in Weimar, irrational political doctrines emerged. Both Schmitt and Lenin insisted that recognizing enmity cannot forever be avoided. Even in a real fog of war, such distinctions has to be made, otherwise they are no match for social conflict. Lenin had casted away the euphemisms. His discovery was the primacy of the will, not long-term successions of socio-economic structures. With these two characters, it's worth clarifying the difference between inventing an ideology and formulating a political theory. Ideology is an action-oriented pack of ideas, a meta-narrative. They concern the future of society and ways to reach it. Marxist ideas about the final aim in history, etc. The ideology that claims absolute truth is more effective than one that claims relative truth. This is the exploitation of religious leftovers for political use. An ideologist is only interested insofar as it can arouse the energy of the masses for mobilization. It works the same way as propaganda, but for those who are politically engaged. Political theory, in contrast, represents a system of concepts for explanatory or interpretive purposes. A political theorist focuses on cognitive content and the substance. Commercially, ideology is for the masses and a theory is for the elite, but in practice both are for retards. This is where the sentient and innovative vanguard emerges, to instead break the wholesome constraints. It always comes down to an extremely motivated and unyielding minority. You can tell a party host that you prefer wine over beer, and they'll only serve it because the others didn't request anything, and will go along with it anyway. This is how it works everywhere. A lot of people want to throw out slogans like ideology doesn't exist, it doesn't matter, but it's very clear that it has empirical reference and relevance, as well as explanatory value for mass politics. The state apparatus isn't an inherently impartial institution, suspended above competing sides. It can only be viewed as a lever to channel interest and marginalize adversaries. All relevant historical people understood this and exploited it for their particular group rule, even when they were a minority. The key here isn't citizenship. That only gives access to non-excludable public goods like street lights and firefighting and national defense and so on. It's about explicitly benefiting, not on a trickle-down administrative level, nor supposedly systemically, but being favored in contrast to another collective. It does not have to be as arcane as some believe.
Just one last ride. Gravity's pulling me down. This time I got myself found, but just before I